Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And today it's Tag Tuesday, and I do have a tag for you. For a change, I do have a tag. This is the name game book tag. The name game book tag, which I saw on AJ Dunn's channel. AJ Dunn reads and writes. AJ did this tag the other day. And I said, that tag looks like something I can do. I'll do that tag, the name game tag. So basically, it's just a real simple tag. It's just an excuse to talk about some books, as all these tags are. So the name game tag is you just take a letter from your name and you just find a book that starts with that same letter and talk about it and recommend it if it's a recommendable book. I am not going to use my whole name because that video would go on too long. I'm just going to go with Vaughan. Vaughan, my strangely spelled Welsh name that it is not spelled like it sounds. It's a strange name, Vaughan. But I will give you a book for each letter in my last name. I know, what a thrill. Pretty exciting stuff here on this channel. So yes, starting with V. What book do I have starting with V that I would recommend to you? You know, I'm going to go with The Vampire Lestat. Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat, the famous sequel to Interview with a Vampire. In some ways, I like The Vampire Lestat better, actually. I don't really think it's a better book, but there's some things about it that I like better. I like the character of Lestat, particularly in this particular book. I like his backstory, very detailed, very fleshed out backstory to Lestat. Wisely, Anne Rice shifted characters to Lestat after Interview with a Vampire. Lestat is a much more interesting character than Louis. Very interesting vampire, the Vampire Lestat. He comes back to life in the 80s, and this has a very 80s feel to it in many portions of this book. And he becomes a rock star. It's not quite as silly as that sounds, but sort of as silly as that sounds. But it's interesting. It's a fun book. It's a good book. I like it. The Vampire Lestat. The complete backstory, pretty much, of the character of Lestat. Now, I know that the Vampire Chronicles took a big dive off a cliff later on in the series. I never read that far in the series. I read the first 4 books. I don't remember what the 5th book was, and I don't know that I read it. I might have stopped before that, but I'm thinking of revisiting that series and giving it another go, because I was pretty young when I read most of those. So yeah, V, The Vampire Lestat. Which brings us to A. What is my A book that I would recommend? Well, this is a book by Robert E. Howard, a kind of an interesting one. This is Almuric. Almuric by Robert E. Howard. It's his only science fiction novel. He didn't write that many novels, but this was one of them, Almuric. And famously, he wrote the first half of it, and then the second half is more of a draft. Some mysterious personage probably came in and finished it. We don't really know who that mysterious person is. There are some contenders, but the very last couple pages certainly don't read like Robert E. Howard. But the novel as a whole is a lot of fun. Really interesting interplanetary story. It's basically Robert E. Howard's version of John Carter of Mars. And if I'm remembering right, I read Almuric before I read John Carter, the John Carter series. I think Almuric might be the first Robert E. Howard book that I read. I think I found this before I found Conan. I read it pretty young when I first read it, and it left a pretty big impression on me. Because the main character in Almuric, Iron Hand, is just such a tough guy. And he's a great character. Iron Hand in Almuric. And the book has some really interesting parts. Of course, Robert E. Howard's writing is always a lot of fun. It takes you right away. Nobody can take you to another time and place like Robert E. Howard can and make you really feel it. And he does in this book. He takes you to this strange planet of Elmuric, this barbaric planet. Of course, it's got to be barbaric, where Iron Hand has to go and uh, fight his way through the planet. It's good stuff. Really pulpy. Of course, he is the world's greatest pulp writer, Robert E. Howard. So really pulpy stuff. And yeah, I like that one a lot. So Almeric Almeric is letter A. So it brings us to you. You. What book am I going to get? Not many books start with you, I don't think. But I'm going to go with The Underground Man. The Underground Man, which is a Lou Archer detective novel by Ross MacDonald. The Lou Archer series, first of all, is a really great detective series. Ross MacDonald's books, his Lou Archer books are just great. I think his Lou Archer books are my favorite detective series, definitely. Just a great series of books. The Underground Man was really, really good. Starts off with an abducted child and just leads to all kinds of crazy places that you don't expect. Because, you know, that's the thing about this series of detective novels. They always go in some really interesting places most of the time. Sometimes you know where they're going, but most of the time you don't know where they're going. And so this was a series of novels that went through the 50s and 60s and 70s. Very popular series of novels. They're in the Library of America now. So I've got a lot of his novels in the Library of America editions. And they deserve to be there because it's just great writing, great series of novels. Definitely check them out. Check out this book too, The Underground Man. So there's that. So that brings us to G. My name is strange. Brings us to G. And I'm going to go with a Stephen King novel that I read a long time ago. I'm looking forward to reading it again. Of course, I'm going through all of Stephen King's books. I got the Read Every Book by Challenge, and I got Stephen King, and I'm slowly going through his books. So it's going to be a while before I get to this one, and this one's Gerald's Game. It just has such a great setup, and it's done really well, I think. A great suspense story of, well, a situation gone entirely wrong, where a woman ends up handcuffed to a bed, and her husband, who is with her, who handcuffed her there, dies. And so she's in a bit of a predicament. And from that simple premise, Stephen King writes a really good book. From what I remember, this was a really, really strong book, Gerald's Game. Some disturbing stuff in here, but it was well handled for the most part. Not all, he's put some disturbing stuff in a lot of his books, and it's not always well handled from what I remember, but in this book I remember it being well done. They made a really good movie that's on Netflix now off of this book, which followed it, from what I remember, pretty closely. So yeah, just check out Gerald's Game. Excellent, excellent book. So there's that, which brings us to H. What am I going to do with H? I'm going to go with Hell House by Richard Matheson. Excellent haunted house story by Richard Matheson. I was thinking of doing The Haunting of Hill House for this, but I decided to go for Hell House. I've never actually sat and talked about Hell House in its own video. I mentioned it a little bit in a Richard Matheson video I did, I guess a while ago, a few months ago. But it's an excellent haunted house story. It pulls no punches, this one. One of his best novels, I think, Hell House. A fantastic novel. Pretty scary in parts. It's got some really creepy moments. This one doesn't mess around with this haunted house story. So that would be Hell House by Richard Matheson, which brings me to A. And there could only be one A for me, and that would be The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which was the first collection of Sherlock Holmes short stories released. Of course, there were two novels that preceded it, The Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Four, and then The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And I haven't done a Sherlock Holmes video in a while. I really ought to do that. I don't even know when the last one I did was. I think it was when I talked about the annotated Sherlock Holmes. But I should get back to just talking about his stories, because that was fun to do. I should do that again. I might do that again soon. But yeah, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, if you have never read Sherlock Holmes, it's a pretty good place to start. You don't have to start with the first novel, A Study in Scarlet. I would, but you don't have to. You can start with The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. It's an excellent book. Which brings us to the last one, the letter N. What would the letter N be? I'm going to go with Necroscope by Brian Lumley. Just because that's on my mind. I'm reading the second Necroscope novel, Van Fairy, right now. And it's really good so far. I did a review of the first Necroscope book. And that was a really, really good book. This is a really good book. It's crazy, Necroscope. There's all kinds of just crazy stuff in it. I mean, there's a vampire in it. There's vampires in it, but that's in the first book at least. That's not what it's about. It's just in there. It's part of this crazy story. You also have the Necroscope, a man who can speak to the dead, and they speak back. And then you have a necromancer who can tear the secrets of the dead from their corpses, literally. And it's full of crazy stuff. There's zombies in it. There's all kinds of crazy stuff in Necroscope. That's not even scratching the surface of crazy that's in Necroscope. And it's all done really well. Lumley was a fan of a lot of old pulp. He was a big fan of Lovecraft, big fan of Robert E. Howard. And it shows in his writing. It's just really, really fun stuff. He's really an interesting writer, Lumley. Doesn't seem to have any hesitation or fears to just put whatever he wants in a book. He'll just put it in there, and it'll work, just because of the way he does it. So, Necroscope, that is that's my the name game. This is the name game book tag. There you go, a tag. Haven't done one of these for a while. Yeah, there you are. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch me tomorrow for my Comic Book Wednesday. I am going to be talking about DC Comics tomorrow, and I'm going to be talking about how I kind of got into DC Comics as a younger person. My history with DC Comics tomorrow. So, you guys, have a great day.